The role of self-perceptions in motivation. Current interest in the effects of self-perceptions on school motivation and achievement runs high and seems to have been prompted by several developments, including the following: a better understanding of the nature of self-concept and self-esteem, Albert Bandura's introduction of the self-efficacy concept, advances in the measurement of self-perceptions, and the consistent finding of a positive relationship between or among self-perceptions, motivation, and school achievement. Much of this interest can be traced to ideas published during the 1960s and 70s by psychologists such as Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, and Arthur Combs. These individuals stress that how students see and judge themselves and others plays an important part in determining how motivated they are and how much they learn. In the next section, we focus on the relationship of academic self-concept to motivation and learning. As we noted earlier in the book, self-concept is somewhat different from self-esteem, self-efficacy, and identity. Table 11.2 offers a quick review of these terms. Type of self-perception, identity, the largely non-valuative picture of people have of themselves and the groups to which they belong. I am an animal lover. I am female. I'm going to be a writer. Another type of self-perception is self-esteem or self-worth. The global evaluative judgments people make of themselves. Identity describes who you are and with whom you identify. Self-esteem indicates how you feel about that identity. I'm a good person. I'm happy with myself the way I am. I feel inferior to most people. Self-concept, the evaluative judgments people make of their competence in specific areas or domains and their associated feelings of self-worth. Past-oriented. For older students, self-concepts may be hierarchically arranged. For example, academic self-concept equals verbal self-concept plus mathematical self-concept plus science self-concept, etc. I'm pretty good at sports. I've always done well in math. My academic skills are about average. I get tongue-tied when I have to speak in public. And then finally, self-efficacy, the beliefs people have about their ability to carry out a specific course of action. Future-oriented. I believe I can learn how to use a computer program. I don't think I'll ever figure out how to solve quadratic equations. I'm sure I can get at least a B in this course. The role of academic self-concept in motivation and learning. Over the years, researchers have consistently found a moderately positive relationship called a correlation between measures of academic self-concept and school achievement. Students who score relatively high on measures of academic self-concept tend to have higher than average grades, but correlation does not imply causation. The fact that students with high academic self-concept scores tend to have high grades is not sufficient grounds for concluding that high academic self-concept causes high achievement. It is just as plausible that high achievement causes increased academic concept, or that increases in both variables are due to the influence of a third variable. For example, the extent of ability grouping in a student's high school. Recent work on the relationship between academic self-concept and achievement has begun to shed some light on what causes what. On the basis of their own research with children in grades 2, 3, and 4, and of the research of others, Guay, Marsh, and Boivin proposed the causal explanation depicted in Figure 11.3. These researchers maintain that academic self-concept and achievement have what are called reciprocal effects. That is, not only does prior achievement affect children's academic self-concept, but also the current strength of a child's academic self-concept influences subsequent achievement. In addition, prior achievement has a significant positive relationship with subsequent achievement, and prior self-concept has a significant positive relationship with subsequent self-concept. A more recent study conducted with 5th grade students confirmed this reciprocal relationship. Here's the figure 11.3, bearing out what they said, that there's a positive relationship between what happened before and what's going to happen in the future. Although the role of motivation was not directly tested in this study, related research suggests that the effect of academic self-concept on subsequent achievement is likely to be influenced by motivation. So a student with a strong academic self-concept for, say, social studies is likely to be highly motivated to take additional courses in that subject and to use effective learning skills which produce higher levels of achievement. At the same time, high levels of achievement strengthen the student's academic self-concept, which supports a high level of motivation, which supports high levels of achievement, and so on. The instructional implication that follows from this research is fairly clear. Teachers should design instructional programs that are aimed directly at improving both academic self-concept and achievement. The former can be accomplished by, for example, pointing out to students how well they have learned certain skills and bodies of knowledge, and the latter can be accomplished by teaching students the information processing and self-regulation skills we discussed in the chapters on information processing theory and social cognitive theory. Motivation and identity. Generally speaking, the relationship between motivation and identity is seen as the link between a person's goal-directed behavior and that person's perception of who she or he is or may become. Jacqueline Eccles, for example, argues that identity can be conceptualized as two sets of self-perceptions. Perceptions of skills, characteristics, and competencies, and perceptions of personal values and goals. In combination, these two sets of self-perceptions determine a person's expectations for success and what kinds of tasks she or he views as important. Thus, identity influences behavioral actions, what one chooses to do and how one chooses to engage in what he or she does. Think back to our earlier discussion of self-efficacy and how efficacy perceptions are context-specific. A student may feel confident in science class, but not as confident in a literature class. A student's self-efficacy perception can influence his or her perceptions of self, and therefore his or her sense of identity. Reininger sees the connection between motivation and identity as the interaction of interest and identity. In her view, a student who is interested in science identifies with the content of science. In this view, understanding a student's motivation means understanding what kinds of content and activities attract a student. Reininger's conception is consistent with what we have examined as intrinsic motivation. The instructional implication here suggests that enhancing motivation in a particular area is a matter of creating opportunities for students to develop their interest in various academic pursuits. Interest can be triggered by a situation that attracts their attention. That interest can be maintained through interactions with others that help the student connect their skills and prior knowledge to the situation. Seeing their own skills and experiences as connected to the situation helps students identify with that situation to the point where they begin to engage and re-engage similar situations on their own. A student who sees a teacher hold a plastic bag filled with water and then pierce that bag with a sharp needle without bursting the bag or spilling even a drop of water, yes, it works like a charm as long as you use the right kind of plastic bag, may reenact the event for family and friends outside the classroom and eventually develop a personal interest in investigating the elastic properties of various substances. This view helps teachers think about the instructional events they plan for their students as opportunities for students to identify with those events and thus develop an interest that will motivate them in the future. We will consider instructional planning in Chapter 13, Approaches to Instruction. As we learned in Chapter 2, theories of psychosocial and cognitive development, identity, is a crucial issue during adolescence. Middle and high school students are consumed with many questions. Who am I? What am I going to do with my life? How do I fit in with others in my group? The perceptions that your students develop, their self-concept, self-esteem, sense of self-efficacy, and identity are part of what they will learn in and out of school and in and out of your classroom. The learning opportunities you provide will influence not only their academic skills and knowledge, but how they come to perceive and understand themselves. Now that you are familiar with approaches to motivation based on humanistic theories and on self-perceptions, consider the additional suggestions for teaching that follow. Many of the motivational techniques we have used in this chapter can be enhanced by the appropriate use of technology and motivation, and we will survey a number of kinds of technology that have been shown to be useful. Take a stand. Increase motivation by maintaining high self-worth. There's no getting around the fact that classrooms are competitive places, largely because students know they are there to develop certain competencies, and that some are better equipped to do so than others. Consequently, the decisions students make that affect their motivation to learn revolve around creating and maintaining a sense of self-worth. When a student pays attention to and imitates the behavior of high-achieving models, strives to develop high levels of self-efficacy in various subject areas, selects task mastery goals, attributes success and failure to appropriate combinations of effort and ability, believes that intellectual ability can be learned and refined, and strives to satisfy growth needs, the student is driven by the need to feel good about herself, self-esteem, or self-worth. The leading proponent of this view, Martin Covington, points out that students who believe they are less capable than others in terms of acquiring the academic competencies demanded by parents, teachers, and society at large will be less motivated to strive for high levels of achievement because of the increased risk of failure, and they will be more motivated to engage in self-protective behaviors as reducing effort and self-handicapping. You can establish the conditions that lead to high levels of motivation by following the many suggestions made in this and other chapters. In particular, and we know we have raised this issue before, do not turn your classroom into a cutthroat survival of the fittest contest for a limited supply of A's, B's, awards, and praise. Instead, help students acquire the skills they need to meet the learning standards established by you, your school district, and your state. Remember, your primary role in the classroom is to teach, not to sort. Do you agree with the argument that teachers should teach, not sort? How will you apply your beliefs in your classroom? Teaching does sort. Sorry. Improving practice through inquiry. One teacher's story. The Dreaded Mile by Peter Mathis. As a physical education teacher, I've come across the issue of motivating students on more than one occasion. In any typical class, you will find the students who are athletic and think that physical education is a free slot in their schedule to engage in their sport of choice. So when I break out the badminton rackets or the frisbee and inform the class that we are not playing basketball, I tend to get some resistance. Then you'll also have the group of students who just downright despise physical activity altogether and give you every excuse in the book as to why they can't participate that specific day. For the purpose of this narrative, I would like to focus on a group of girls that I had in class one year. We started out the year covering the components of fitness, and to gather some baseline measurements, students engaged in a variety of physical fitness tests. Without a doubt, there is always some sort of moaning, groaning, or even spontaneous injuries that arise when it is time to run the dreaded mile. On this particular day, a group of girls approached me as I was corralling students at the starting line. I remember the looks on their faces as they approached me. They displayed looks of anguish mixed with a pinch of apathy, which gave me just enough time to realize what was coming my way. Female student number 1, Mr. Mathis, do we really have to run the mile? Female student number 2, can we do it after school? Female student number 3, can we walk it? Although I was bombarded with questions, I could tell that I had a motivation issue on my hands, and luckily I was prepared to deal with it. My first goal was to get to the root of the problem. I asked the girls why they didn't want to participate. This allowed them to have their opinions be heard. From there, I quickly gave each of the girls a positive form of encouragement that was intended to get the girls to start believing in themselves. I then shifted my attention as to why this activity was important and related it to real-life experiences. I asked the girls for examples of people who they knew who suffered from cardiovascular-related symptoms. They were all able to give me examples, and I parlayed these examples into specific reasons as to why cardiovascular endurance is one of the most important components of fitness. I could see that I was starting to win the girls over, and I was ready for my finishing move. I informed the girls that if they tried their best and completed the mile, I would allow them to double Dutch in the next class, an activity they begged me to do every day, and it was a cardiovascular activity anyway. Although outnumbered at first, I was able to successfully motivate those 3 girls to participate in the activity. I followed up with a phone call home in which I let their parents know how proud I was of them for participating and understanding the importance of the activity. The strategy I used was centered on establishing positive relationships with students and providing real-life examples from which they could form a personal connection. Peter Mathis is a teacher and athletic director in the Clareton City School District. Suggestions for teaching: satisfying deficiency needs and strengthening self-perceptions. Make learning inviting to students. Motivation researchers maintain that students care about learning when they are invited to learn. Teachers extend such invitations when they do the following: meet Maslow's safety and belonging needs. Examples of meeting students' safety and belonging needs include never ridiculing a student for lack of knowledge or skills, or letting other students do the same, praising students when they do well and inquiring about possible problems when they do not, relating lessons to students' interests, and learning students' names as quickly as possible. Provide opportunities for students to make meaningful contributions to their classroom. Examples here include having students help classmates master instructional objectives through short-term tutoring or cooperative learning arrangements, and inviting students to use personal experiences and backgrounds as a way to broaden a lesson or class discussion. One classroom teacher created overhead transparencies of students' work for use as an instructional tool. This gave students the sense that they were a contributing part of a community. Create a sense of purpose for the materials students are required to learn. As we point out in Chapter 13, Approaches to Instruction, students rarely ask, why do I have to learn this? They do, although it is uppermost in their minds, and teachers rarely offer an explanation without being prompted. One way to create purpose for a reading lesson is to engage the students in a discussion of an issue they are interested in that is at the heart of the story or novel they are about to read. Allow students to develop a sense of power about their learning. Students who believe that the knowledge and skills they are learning are useful to them now, using history as a tool for thinking about the present, for example, who know what constitutes good quality work and believe themselves capable of producing it, and who know how to set goals and meet them, are more likely than other students to believe they are in control of their learning. Create challenging tasks for students. Students who work hard, who feel they are being stretched, yet who succeed more often than not, are more likely to enjoy learning and to approach future tasks with increased motivation than are students whose work is routine and consistently at a low level of difficulty. Direct learning experiences toward feelings of success in an effort to encourage an orientation toward achievement, high self-esteem, and a strong sense of self-efficacy and academic self-concept. To feel successful, an individual must first establish goals that are neither so low as to be unfulfilling, nor so high as to be impossible, and then be able to achieve them at an acceptable level. Make use of learning goals and objectives that are challenging but attainable, and, when appropriate, that involve student input. As will be discussed in Chapter 13, you will have primary responsibility for choosing the learning objectives for your students. You can use this process to heighten motivation by inviting your students to participate in selecting objectives, or at least in thinking along with you as you explain why the objectives are worthwhile. This will tend to shift the emphasis from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. To help students suggest appropriate objectives, you may want to use the techniques recommended by Roger Major. You might assist your students in stating objectives in terms of a time limit, a minimum number of correct responses, a proportion of correct responses, or a sample of actions. Examples: how many minutes do you think you will need to outline this chapter? When you finish, we'll see that film I told you about. George, you've got 6 out of 10 on this spelling quiz. How many do you want to try for on the next? Help students master your objectives. As you've seen, a student's past accomplishments on a particular task influence his or her self-efficacy and academic self-concept. Consequently, you should do whatever you can to help students achieve at an acceptable level. One important recommendation for helping students become better learners was made earlier. Teach them how to create and use learning strategies. Another suggestion that will help them get the most out of their strategies is to assign moderately difficult tasks and provide the minimum amount of assistance necessary to complete the task successfully. Think of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and the concept of scaffolding.